Hey everybody, welcome to part 3 of our series on the great Bud Grant, in which we have reached deep into the archives to find some of the most interesting and sometimes crazy Bud Grant stories that maybe you've never heard before. And thanks to our friend Colin of Jaguar Gator 9 on YouTube, check out his amazing NFL research channel. All right, let's get into this wild Bud Grant story. Pretending to arrest someone, putting live animals in the office, even going as far as pretending to shoot one of his own players with a gun. These are some of the craziest pranks that the legendary Minnesota Vikings head coach Bud Grant ever pulled off. For those who knew Bud Grant, they knew him as a jokester, a prankster, and as a coach who liked to be loose and not take things too seriously. Said offensive lineman Tim Irwin, who played 13 seasons in Minnesota, 4 of which were under the guidance of Grant, quote, "Hidden underneath that mask was a sense of humor that not many people knew about. And those who knew Grant knew that you always had to be on your toes because you never quite knew what he was going to do next. Don't let his greatness and ability as a football coach fool you. He knew how to joke around with the absolute best of them." And Grant said all the way back in 1968, "Football is serious business, but there's always time for a laugh." Take this instance from the final year of his tenure with the Vikings in 1985. After Bud Grant retired following the 83 season and Les Steckel had his disastrous stint in 1984 where he was trying to run the Vikings like a military operation, Bud Grant lightened the mood with this prank involving running back Ted Brown, who had played under Grant from 1979 to 1983. One day in practice, a cop car rolled up to the practice field. An officer got out of the car to speak to Bud Grant. After Grant spoke with the officer, he approached Ted Brown, who was in uniform and was getting ready for practice. Grant told Brown that the police needed to see him right away and what exactly he was going to get arrested for and what exactly he did and what exactly the officer said, "I have no clue." However, Brown was frisked by the police and put into a cop car, and the cops drove away. Scary stuff, right? That's got to scare you as a fellow Vikings player. You're talking to Ted Brown one minute and the next he's arrested for something. Well, a few minutes later, the cop car returned and Brown was all smiles. Brown wasn't really in trouble. It was just another one of the elaborate pranks that Grant was famous for. But it wasn't just the players who had to be on high alert when it came to Bud Grant's shenanigans. It was also the secretaries who worked for the Vikings, because every April Fool's Day, Grant had something planned. Grant was big on animals. Seeing he was an avid hunter, every year when the holiday rolled around, some creature would be in the office that was not supposed to be there. One year, he put a chicken in the women's restroom. In 1984, when Grant was a consultant for the Vikings and not the head coach, he still showed up to put a cow in the building. In 1980, he even brought an orangutan to the team facility. One time, he hid a rooster in the women's coat closet. And one more notable one that involved salamanders that he put in desk drawers with a snake that got out and went down the hallway. But it wasn't just animals that Grant messed with on April Fool's Day. Other pranks by Bud Grant on that day included him hiding all of the desk chairs, hiding all of the coffee pots, and taking a secretary's desk and taping a skunk-scented cotton wad underneath it, which made the whole place smell terrible. Now, all of these pranks were in good fun, and even the secretaries had fun trying to get back at Grant with pranks of their own. One time, the secretaries coordinated a prank with the Como Park Zoo to put a bear cub in his office. As Roz Sorensen, one of the secretaries, said on Grant's joking nature and what to expect on April Fool's Day, quote, "We'd be shocked if there wasn't something. The question was never, won't there be something, but rather, what will it be? He likes to get the girls. He thinks we're kind of squeamish." And it wasn't just the secretaries and the team employees that Grant liked to mess with either. He even messed with the writers. One of the more iconic pranks came in the 1977 season when he messed with legendary journalist of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, Sid Hartman. Hartman got a brand new car, a Buick convertible, and Grant, being the animal prankster that he was, decided to put 2 dead birds on the top of the folds. The prank was simple in nature. When Bud Grant opened the roof to his car, the birds would land on him. However, to everyone's surprise, that did not happen. Instead, when Sid opened up the roof of his convertible, the birds didn't fall onto him. Rather, they fell into a compartment completely unbeknownst to Sid Hartman, and the birds stayed there and ripened.
You can imagine what that would do.
This caused the brand new car to absolutely reek. Any of that new car smell was gone quickly and replaced with dead bird smell. It wasn't for a few weeks that the prank actually happened that Hartman realized what was going on and knew why his car smelled so badly. That was all because of Bud Grant and his antics. And when I say that no one was immune from the pranks of Bud Grant, I truly mean it. Not even his own family. During one such instance in the 60s in Winnipeg, Grant's kids were at school and his wife Pat was at her beauty parlor. Now you'd think that Grant would be at work coaching up the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but he decided to stay behind for a bit and was the last one to leave the house. Grant decided to trash his own house, turning it completely upside down. And when the kids returned from school, they frantically called their mom and let them know that the house had been robbed. They called the police because they were terrified, and Pat came rushing back from the beauty parlor. And just as the police were taking fingerprints, she realized that the house wasn't robbed at all. The robber was Bud Grant. Bud was the one that flipped the house upside down. Pat laughed on this eventually, saying, quote, he may grow up someday. And that wasn't the only time that he pranked his own wife, as one time during a press conference, he convinced a bunch of writers that his wife knew how to cook crow and that she made the best crow in the world, even though she had no idea how to cook crow. And she said that at least 50 people called her after the story ran, and she had to explain that it was a practical joke, and she had no idea what her husband was talking about. But as crazy as these pranks may seem, without a doubt, the craziest prank that Grant ever pulled off, one that would never be attempted today for obvious reasons, came during practice that he had not as head coach of the Vikings, but rather up in Winnipeg as the head coach of the Blue Bombers. The story goes something like this. One unidentified player on the Blue Bombers was a bit too excitable in practice, and Grant was trying to think of a way to calm him down. So he hatched a plan. He had a player on the Blue Bombers intentionally sabotage the practice. The player would, at the request of Grant, mess up his assignments and would continue to mess up his assignments. At first, it was no big deal, but then every time he messed up, the coaches would pretend to get madder and madder, and obviously the excitable player had no idea it was a setup. Finally, the assistant coach had had enough, and after the player in on the prank messed up again, the coach went into his pocket, pulled out a .22 pistol, and shot him. I am not making this up. Bud Grant, who was an avid hunter, brought his gun to practice to give to his assistant. The assistant pulled it out and fired it at him. Now, the gun was blank, and no one got hurt during this. But then again, what is the rule they teach you about gun safety is to always assume a gun is loaded. Not a great idea and would never happen ever today. But of course, there's a lot of things that happened in the 60s that you would never try today. Anyway, I'm going to take a wild guess that that player learned his lesson and stopped messing up assignments and being too eager. But seeing as Grant went 102, 56-2 in the CFL and won 4 Grey Cups and made it to the playoffs 8 times in 10 years, despite the, shall we say, unconventional nature of his strategies, it clearly worked out. In many ways, there will never be another head coach like Bud Grant. His style was truly one of a kind, and so was his success. And he also showed and taught an important lesson to everyone that you don't have to take yourself too seriously and always stay on your toes when Bud Grant is around. Thanks again for watching all of our great stories about Bud Grant, one of the great coaches in NFL history. I'm Matthew Coller. Thanks for watching.